We're starting chapter 25 today, you guys. The very last chapter of this semester. And I bet you guys are like, yay, kind of tired of looking at me talk to you, right? Okay, chapter 5 is the history of life on Earth. Okay, we have many lost worlds. I mean, if any of you guys are into Jurassic Park and all that, you've seen that. But we have the organisms that were alive a long time ago are much different than the ones that are alive now. And we have this fossil record. It shows how it says macroevolution changes, huge changes have occurred over time, large scales of time. Okay, we have the emergence of terrestrial vertebrates, animals with backbones that can live on land. Okay, we have mass extinctions, the dinosaurs. We have the origin of the flight of birds, how their arms changed into wings. How did that happen? And it wasn't just the arms. I mean, just think of the bones had to change in there and the musculature and everything. So you have all these changes that occurred. Okay, here's I don't even want to say how to say, I don't know my dinosaurs very well, you guys, but you can see the change in the skulls. We have on early Earth, the origin of the Earth was just a big soup is all it was. We had a lot of chemical and physical processes that had to occur in order to get to where we are now. We started out with these simple cells and they went through various stages. They started building proteins. They started producing oxygen. At one time, oxygen was actually a pollutant. Our first atmosphere was methane. Okay, so we had abiotic synthesis. Abiotic meaning without air, because there wasn't any. Okay, so we had small organic molecules. They start joining together to form larger molecules. Pretty soon, where we had single units. Now we put all those single units together and we have huge units. We got photocells, packaging the molecules in photocells. These would be the precursors for photosynthesis. Okay, so and then they started to actually self-replicate. Okay, instead of just having to be rebuilt from scratch each time, they could divide and make more. Okay, so the synthesis of the organic compounds on early Earth. Now remember, organic means it has carbon, hydrogen, and usually oxygen. Okay, the Earth, they figure, is up 4.6 billion years ago is when the Earth was formed. Okay, along with the whole solar system, 4.6 billion years ago. Okay, the Earth was bombarded by rocks, meteorites, and ice. Likely that's where we got water started from. We had seas that were forming about 4 billion years ago. And again, this is all from the fossil record. I wasn't there, you go, guys. I didn't record it. Okay, Earth's early atmosphere, like I said, contains some water vapor. And these usually probably came from volcanic eruptions. But we had, most of it was nitrogen oxides, carbon dioxide, like I say, methane, ammonia, hydrogen, a lot of nitrogen compounds in our early atmosphere. You notice there's no oxygen. Okay, so in the 1920s, these two guys that like their initials, they said the early atmosphere was a reducing environment. And again, that's the nitrogen. Okay, then Stanley Miller, we'll say his name because he has more than just initials. And this Harold guy, they started doing lab experiments that showed abiotic, again, without air, synthesis of organic molecules is a reducing atmosphere. And that's where we first started out. Okay, not oxidizing, reducing. However, the evidence is not yet convincing that the early atmosphere was that way. So that's what again, remember, these are theories. Theories can be proven wrong. Okay, so they think that's what was going on, that our early atmosphere was abiotic. There wasn't any oxygen. Instead of forming in the atmosphere, the first organic compounds, they say, were synthesized in volcanoes and deep sea vents and stuff like that. So our atmosphere changed, but it didn't change in the atmosphere itself. It was the stuff on land that was released into the atmosphere that changed it. Okay, so their experiments demonstrated that the organic molecules could have formed in a bunch of different situations. Okay, the first genetic material was probably RNA, not DNA. It didn't have the double strand, it only had single strands. Okay, think of the organisms that would, we didn't have any multicellular organisms. So they think RNA was probably the first. We had RNA before we had DNA. Okay, And it was called ribozymes, is what they called them. They were found to catalyze many different reactions. We have ribozymes in our cells still today. Okay, so they said the ribozymes could make complementary copies of short stretches of RNA. Now we have it where it can make huge amounts. So a lot of things have changed that way. Natural selection, again, had produced self-replicating RNA molecules. In other words, individuals that had the self-replicating produced more offspring. And again, natural selections, and when they didn't do that, didn't make it. Okay, so RNA molecules that were more stable and replicated more quickly would have left, the descendants that weren't allowed, that couldn't do that. They basically died, and these guys moved on. Okay, so the early genetic material probably was formed from RNA and not DNA. Okay, they had vesicles containing RNA that were capable of replication. They were called protocells. Okay, pro meaning before. Okay, early cells. RNA could have provided the template for DNA, and instead of the other way around, because right now we know that RNA is made from DNA, but this was in the beginning, RNA was the one that provided it. But the thing about DNA, once DNA started being formed, it's more stable than RNA. So again, natural selection. Okay, so where do they get this information? A lot of it comes from the fossil records. It looks at the change of histories of life on Earth in the fossils. Okay, they have a lot of sedimentary rock. If you don't know your geology, we have different kinds of rock, igneous, metamorphic, whatever. Sedimentary is what it sounds like. It's based because sediments have been deposited into layers, and you get a strata, which are the layers, and that's where they get most of the fossils. Igneous are like lava that's, first it came out of the volcanoes, and then when it cooled and it's hard, it doesn't have fossils in it. So sedimentary rock is where you're looking for your fossils. Okay, the fossil record shows that there's a lot of change in organisms. 4.6 billion years, a few things are going to happen. Okay, so few individuals have fossilized, and again, that's another problem. Not everything gets fossilized. Even few have been discovered. So there's a lot of fossils that haven't been discovered, but a lot of critters that are alive at one time never got fossilized. Okay, so the fossil record is biased in favor of species that existed for a long time. Okay, because there's a record of them. So there was probably a lot more things, but there just isn't a record of them. So, the more they're in the fossil record, the more credit they get for existing for a long time. Okay, and again, if they're in the fossil record, they were abundant, they were widespread, and there's more fossils. Okay, and they have to have hard parts, because when they're deposited in the layers, if they're all soft parts, no fossil. Okay. So how rocks and fossils are dated, what they do is they take these layers, the strata, and to reveal the relative ages, they use radiometric dating. It's carbon dating. There's one isotope of carbon called carbon-14 that it decays at a certain rate. And so they can check the rate of decay, and they can figure out how old things are. So a radioactive parent isotope decays into daughters, and it's a constant rate. Okay, and it's a large rate, because like some things, when they decay, they can decay in 2 days. Well, obviously that's not going to work so well. Carbon-14 has a long decay rate, so they can figure it out how old they are. Okay, so each isotope has a known half-life, and the time required for the half of the parent isotope to decay. That's where they can figure out how old that fossil is. Okay, radioactive carbon dating can be used. The oldest fossils, I think, are 75,000 years old that I know of. I know the older fossils, some of the isotopes, they are above and below the fossils, so they kind of use that as a way to date them, but they don't have the exacts. And again, if you're laying the layers, the older ones are going to be on the bottom. So if you find, 75,000 years, well, the ones below it are obviously older than that. Okay, so when we look at these, we have the origin of new groups of organisms, and the newest group is mammals. Okay, mammals haven't been around that long, but they belong to a group of animals called pteropods. Ptera meaning 4, pods meaning legs. Okay, so the evolution of the unique features that mammals have can be traced through gradual changes over time. Okay, one thing they look at again for the key events is the geological record. They have it divided into areas, and I'm sure you guys have heard of this, the Hadean, Archean, the Proterozoic, the Phanerozoic. They have these eons, these big stretches of years of time. Okay, the Phanerozoic includes the last half billion years, so that's where we are right now. Okay. And then they're broken down into eras as well. So an eon is a big group of time, and then you can break it down. Here you can see we have the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and the Cenozoic. Okay, so these are what the eon that we live in right now can be broke down into these three groups. Okay, the major boundaries between these eras correspond to when they have distinctions, major distinctions in the fossil record. That's what they go by. Okay, so when they looked at the first single-celled organisms, okay, the oldest known fossils are called stromatolites. Okay, stromatolites are in the rock layer, and they actually have to be an accumulation, because just think about it. If they're only a single cell, there has to be a whole bunch of them, and they make what they call mats. Okay, so they have this accumulation of these single-celled organisms, and they call them bacterial mats. Okay, they can date back as far as 3.5 billion years ago. So, you know, the Earth was a billion years old when these guys start showing up. Okay, then we have prokaryotes. So stromatolites are even before, because these are just a single cell, and they're not eukaryotes. Okay, they don't have nucleus and endoplasmic reticulum, all that. Okay, so they gave way to the prokaryotes. Okay, for a lot of years, prokaryotes is all that was on Earth. Okay, and then now we started getting these cells to make their own food. So, and when one of the processes of making your own food, photosynthesis, is giving off oxygen. So that's where they think the oxygen that's in our atmosphere now came from. Okay, the oxygen was produced by photosynthesis. It reacted, in this case, it was with dissolved iron that precipitated out to form these bands. And you'll see this if you've ever gone on a boat ride on Sakakawea. You'll see the layers. If you see like the brown, those are the iron bands, where the rust occurs in the iron because of the release of oxygen, because we know that's what causes rust, is iron and oxygen. Okay, so about 2.7 billion years ago, oxygen began accumulating in the atmosphere and rusting all our iron-rich terrestrial rocks. So that's where they changed their color. Okay, so the oxygen revolution, they call it, 2.7 to 2.3 billion years ago. So the first 2 billion years, we really didn't have a lot of oxygen going on. Okay, and because of that oxygen, many groups were killed. You know, they counted on nitrogen, and now we got oxygen. So again, like I said before, oxygen was a pollutant. Okay, so some groups survived and adapted to use oxygen. If they didn't, they died. And again, that's a little bit of natural selection going on. Okay, so they started doing cellular respiration. They harvest that oxygen and they used it, and then it went back and forth. Okay, so the origin of multicellularity, because before this point, it's just one-celled organisms. Well, they started kind of grouping together. Okay, so the second wave occurred when the cells started to join together, and the first thing they gave rise to was algae. Okay, so we still have multicellular algae today. I don't know if you guys have ever looked at them. If you were in high school, you might have looked at like Volvox and Elodea and things like that. And then plants, and then we got fungi, and then we got animals. Okay, so that's the order they kind of went in. Okay, the oldest known fossils of multicellular eukaryotes, okay, of true cells, 1.2 billion years ago. So they really haven't been around that long. And the first ones were small algae. Okay, so again, plants, multicellular plants, and animals, we just haven't been here that long. Excuse me. Older fossils dating to 1.8 billion years ago may also be small multicellular, but they're not sure. These for sure. These have been proven. These are maybe. Okay. So then we had what they call the Cambrian explosion. It occurred during the Cambrian era. There's a sudden appearance of fossils resembling modern animals in the Cambrian, 535 to 525 million years ago. Okay, now you might think that's a long time, but if you put it in perspective, that's only, a half a billion years, and the Earth is 4.6 billion years old. So, for 4 billion years, no animals. Just the last half billion, there's been animals. Okay, There's a few phyla, and these guys, I'm not talking about multicellular like um, mastodons and whatever. We're talking sponges.